Welcome to Tech Society on Leadership, here on location at the Alex Hotel in Northbridge, Perth. We are here with the Honourable Don Punch, Member of the Legislative Assembly for Bunbury and Minister for Disability Services, Fisheries, Innovation and ICT, and Seniors and Ageing.
Welcome to Tech Society.
Who is Don Punch?
Don Punch is a person who arrived in Australia as a 14-year-old and went to Manjimup. And for those who don't know, Manjimup was a bit of a timber town back in the day, and a lot of people were missing a few fingers. And I thought, this is a bit strange for Australia. I wondered if it was a ritual. And I realised it was actually just part of the industry down there at that time. But going to Manjimup as a young person and finishing my schooling there gave me a love of regional Western Australia. And I spent a bit of time at Perth doing my uni qualifications, and then for the most part I've lived all my life in regional WA. And it's been great. I'm married, have 3 grown-up sons now. I hesitate to say how old they are, but time goes very quickly. But it's been a wonderful country for me. I came from Manchester originally. It's a very different city to Manjimup as a very small town. So you go from a city of 7 million people to a town of 3,500.
That's a big change.
Big change, yeah.
Right, so your work history includes almost 2 decades in public service. Firstly in the Southwest Development Corporation, and obviously now as a state member for Bunbury. But even before that, you had a pretty long career providing community service in regional areas. What influences in your life led you to serving others?
Well, I actually spent nearly 40 years in the public sector because my community services work was with the State Public Service and in regional WA. And I think the sort of values that I have are driven by social justice values. So they really informed my first qualifications in psychology and social work. But I have a great love for understanding human behaviour. And the work in the Development Commission allowed me to marry that understanding of human behaviour with economics. And regional development is very much about the interaction of people and local regions and infrastructure and business opportunities, and it was a great opportunity. So I guess it's that passionate interest in public policy and social justice that's driven me.
So you've been the minister for just over 4 months.
Seems like a lifetime.
You've got several portfolios. One of them, obviously, we're a bit more interested in the others. How do you balance your time and attention across all of these policy areas and your personal life?
It's a challenge. I think one of the big shocks, even though I knew that it would happen, is how short a day becomes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of appointments and meetings and responsibilities, in essence, as a minister. And then you multiply that essentially across 5 portfolios and having an electorate office as well. And then family life and personal life. So it really is a balancing act. I think the important thing is you need to have a really good team around you at the electorate office, because they really look after the community that elected me while I'm away from the office. And a really good team in the ministerial office that really has a time to drill into the more detailed nuances of the policy issues that we deal with, and really manage the priorities effectively so that you can make the most use of the time that you have. And the most pivotal point is really having an understanding family, because when you move into these sorts of roles, family becomes incredibly important because you have so little time that you spend with that person or with your children. Now, my children have all grown up and left home. But Helen often tells me that she spends a lot of time at home on her own. So she's had to carve out her own sort of life, in a sense, to balance the fact that I'm not there as often as I used to.
Does she have to slot things in with your appointment secretary?
I was about to ask, is it scheduled family time?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. Helen will often ring up the electorate office and say, we need to be in such a place at this time, and try and work that in. It's a bit embarrassing, really, when your life partner, your wife or husband, has to ring up the person at the office to book a time to be with you. But I also think you've got to spend time where you just slot a day out of the calendar, and you just it's very hard to disengage from the work because it is intense and you become very passionate about it. But you've got to work hard to be in the moment with your partner or with your family.
Not on the phone.
Yeah, so
ringing emails.
really the old iPhone is a bit of a torment because you're just sort of reaching out for it impulsively all the time. But you've got to put it to one side and focus and make sure that you do with family time. It's important for our own mental health as members of Parliament, but it's important for the family and for your partners, and get the balance right.
Well, on that, what are your personal goals as a minister?
Well, you can come into a ministerial role and simply administer the portfolios, which means that you review the bits of paper that come forward and you sort of go through the motions and everything works well and you administer it. But 4 years goes very quickly in a term of government. And looking back and thinking, what did you actually achieve in each of the portfolios? That becomes a critical question. So in all the work that I do, I try and think about what's the extent of the difference that this will make in terms of the objectives that I have for the portfolio. And how can I connect with people to make sure that my objectives are actually in sync with where the stakeholders also see the future. So I think you can, it's a real balancing act again in terms of making sure that you don't get trapped by administration and you keep your eye on the sort of contribution that you want to make and where the future is going to take you to. Now, I've got 5 very diverse portfolio interests, but what unites them all is that there are an enormous number of stakeholders and they're essentially people-focused portfolios. Even fisheries is about the relationship between people and a fishing resource that's either recreationally based or commercially based, but is fundamentally important to the lives of those people. So every aspect of what we do is about people and making a difference to people.
How does the innovation play into that?
Well, the innovation and ICT are sort of coupled together with the word "and."
Yeah.
And yet in some respects they're similar, but they're quite different.
Yes.
So innovation to me is really about taking the creativity that comes out of people's inventions, ideas, visions for doing something differently or trying something in a different way, and looking at that particularly from a government point of view around how we might assist them in terms of commercialising that and taking a business idea into a startup and then through the process into a growth phase. And when I look at innovation in Perth and in Western Australia generally, we're in an enormously innovative state. And yet I don't think we understand that as a community. And, Perth here has 5 universities.
Yeah.
Many of our regional towns have a university presence in them. Anywhere else in the world, and you'd regard Perth as a university city. But here we regard it as a mining city. I was speaking with a professor a while back who looks after the Gravity Wave project out at Gingin. What a great project that is.
Very cool.
But he was telling me that some time ago they had a need for a very accurate clock. And they developed a sapphire crystal clock in downtown Fremantle. And the sapphire crystal clock worked off microwaves that vibrated the crystal, and you get the time sequence off that. But it was so accurate that the technology was then used for clear air radar turbulence detection in aircraft. Now that's the sort of thing that's come out of Western Australia. And another friend of mine started up a business a while back, saw the opportunity to look at superalloy manufacture and use those for aircraft turbine blade manufacture. Now, we wouldn't have thought of that as being a business that you would have here in Western Australia, but it's in Canning Vale, and it was opened by Margaret Thatcher back in 1986. So we have this enormous potential here in thinking innovatively about how we make things, how we do things differently. And I think that's a great thing to have. So from an innovation point of view, I think we need to tell the story. I think we need to help people grow their ideas into commercial realities. And I think we need to keep the intellectual property here in Western Australia as much as we possibly can.
I agree. I think, mind the pun, but I think Bunbury also punches above its weight class on this one, right? Thanks.
Yeah, it certainly does. Bunbury's a really the second. I haven't spoken about ICT yet, so I'll come back to that.
Yes.
But Bunbury is a state's second city, and it's a city that you can go to in Western Australia if you really decide that you don't want to be in Perth. People might have a number of reasons for that, but the southwest is a great region in of itself, and Bunbury has one of the most diverse economies of any location in regional Western Australia. And it also has an enormous capability in terms of research and innovation and ICT, and we see that in areas like manufacturing, where people are using advanced robotics in their manufacturing processes and process control systems in a lot of the mineral processing that takes place in the southwest. So it's a real little haven of ideas and technology and growth.
So what do you think is the reason for this haven of innovation? You spent some time at the Southwest Development Corporation as the CEO, and you were transforming Bunbury into an economic powerhouse. But what is it about Bunbury that gives it that kind of potential?
Well, it's really well located. It sits at the head of the Southwest region, and the Southwest region is a $15 billion economy and has grown consistently every year despite global recessions. It slows down a little bit sometimes, but generally it's growing quite well. That diversity really supports an export-focused economy. So nearly all of the product produced in the southwest either certainly goes into a statewide market, but goes to either a national market or an international market. We have an excellent port. It's mainly focused on bulk exports. It's got a very strong mineral processing capability as well as a mining capability. And it has some outstanding businesses both in the manufacturing and the construction sector that are working at a national level, not just at a regional level or a local city level. So all of that vibrancy connected with lifestyle opportunity, I think, really gives it a real attraction for people who want to pursue a career, but want to pursue it in an environment that's maybe more conducive to their lifestyle.
So I just want to, as you said, circle back to ICT. So you're obviously the Minister for ICT now. In broad terms, what are your objectives in this space, and what can the industry expect from the government in the short term?
Yeah, ICT has got to become ubiquitous in a sense. At the moment, for many people, computing and technology is sort of out there, and using the iPhone or using the PC for some email or accessing the internet is. For a lot of people who are just living an everyday life, that's what they use ICT for. Yeah. So from a government point of view, if we can use ICT to provide a solution to some of the problems that we experience in terms of access, particularly rural and remote access, if we can make government appear as a single sort of doorway online for the community, so that the community can engage with government on any sort of transaction and do it really simply. At the moment, you've got to think about which department, what's their website. Then each of those websites has their own structure in terms of how you might transact with government. So one of our first challenges, and we are in the process of finalising our digital strategy, is making it a seamless approach in terms of government transaction and using online capability to overcome some of the issues associated with distance. And we see that in things like telehealth, and the opportunities to broaden that engagement with people really, I think they're pretty limitless. Imagine if you wanted to change your address, and you've got to do it for your driver's license, your boat license, your fishing license, for everything else. You can go into one portal, change your address, and it automatically changes it all through every government agency. So it becomes a very seamless approach. And then if we can do that from the point of view of people who are seniors, who may not be as well engaged with IT, or if we can make it really accessible for people with different abilities, then it can change the nature of those transactions. The other thing that I think is a real challenge is telling the narrative both of innovation and IT here in Western Australia, and identifying what the industry is and the capability of the industry.
Because there is a big difference between the ICT industry and the the innovation industry or tech industry, isn't
Yeah,
it?
but it's also fractured in the sense of how do you define it?
Yeah.
Where is it? Who is it? And I think, as a minister, I would really like to work with the sector on developing an industry vision for ICT here in Western Australia, and really showcasing that, and again, retaining the capability of ICT here in the West. And we've got some really great skills in process control, as an example, and robotics and cyber. And those are opportunities that I think we excel in, and we're taking into a global marketplace. If we position Western Australia well in that space, then I think it's a great opportunity for us. And again, it changes the narrative about what Western Australia stands for. We've got a great mining sector, don't take away from that, but we have many other aspects to what we do, and that's one of them.
Well, thanks to the mining industry, we have a real brain trust here. So it's part of it.
And the mining industry has driven some fantastic research in robotics, in process control, in remote access. Now we've got the space industry is taking off in Western Australia. That's driving innovation in composites and manufacturing, software, electronics. All of those marry across, so we don't have to think about it as a space industry and a mining industry. We can actually look at the overlaps and get people talking with each other.
What can we expect from the WA government in terms of support for the ICT sector as we transition out of the pandemic?
Well, the first thing I want to do is work with the sector in defining what the industry is and having a vision for its development and what its workforce development needs might be.
It's a big question.
Yeah, because and there's not an easy answer to that, because I don't think it's been front and centre in terms of the industry's line of sight. We've had a lot of individual aspects of that. The WA government has done some enormous work in terms of supercomputing and the Pawsey Centre and looking at some of those innovations. Let's stitch all of that together and really showcase a future direction for the industry. From my point of view, the digital strategy I think is going to be a major step forward, and that will highlight key areas that the government views as being central. Inclusivity, access and communications, the sort of ease with which you can transact with government. Those are all fundamental, and how we engage with the industry locally to achieve that I think is going to be really important. And then there's the other side of that is data sharing and data analytics, and that I think has got some enormous potential for us in terms of improving the way that we actually plan and administer public policy.
Now, we've covered a lot of different types of technologies now. We've got process controls, robotics, space. Is there anything what are you most excited about? What's the most interesting?
It's such a really exciting area.
Yeah.
I mean, to go and talk with people out at Curtin University about the little spacecraft that they're developing and getting kids involved in terms of designing space experiments, right the way through to some of the most simple innovations that we've seen, hanging in Juma House, my own office block, for really innovative bike racks. They seem to be at two extremes, but they showcase the creativity of what we have. And that's at the centre of innovation. Innovation is about technology, but technology is about the creativity of individual people who come up with the ideas. The bit that I'm really most excited about, though, is the rolling out of STEM in our schools and getting kids really excited about these opportunities and getting them to understand, I talked to some kids in my own electorate, say in Daniela or Bunbury, and they've got some ideas about the future, but they don't imagine the sorts of things that they could be doing here in WA, like space. Never think of a career in the space sector, but it's achievable. And I think if we get the narrative out there and we build the links and we show people the pathways, I think we can harness some enormous talent.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, on that, actually, getting the message out there, what's the best way to connect with the community?
Oh, look, I've been thinking about that a lot. I mean, from my own point of view as a minister, I think I can play a significant role in connecting up the various parts of my portfolios and getting people to think across some of the barriers that and break down some of the silos that we've had. But I think there's a whole range of tools in terms of communication, whether it's online, whether it's through showcasing particular innovations, or things like our Innovator of the Year program, or the even showcasing the Innovation Voucher Scheme and what it achieves. But we have to tell the story, and we have to have more people telling the story consistently, because you can say it once and people think, oh, that's great, and then they forget.
Yeah.
But if you repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, then the message sinks in. And we've got a great story to tell.
So things like Insight Awards and things like that as well.
Yeah, awards, recognition, getting people together. I mean, for a while in Bunbury, we ran a series of conferences and symposiums called Critical Horizons. And we just pulled in the speakers who are at the cutting edge of a whole range of topics. And we'd have a conference that would explore new technologies such as nanotechnology, IT developments, communications developments, and think about that from the point of view of our own community. And it gets people thinking laterally and opens up new opportunities, and people connect up in those sorts of forums as well. So we create this culture of thinking about the future, thinking about the critical issues, and connecting in a way that leads to better outcomes, in my view. One of the great things I was so exciting, this portfolio, I was at UWA, and I was opening up their participating in the opening of their new science labs. It had a particular name, which escapes me at the minute. But anyway, it's this brilliant building. But what was really important was that inside it was not a series of academics' offices. They were learning spaces and learning hubs where students would come together, researchers would come together, and they'd actually brainstorm ideas and look at ways of putting them into practice and have the equipment there to experiment and do things. So it's really a people space rather than an office-based space. And I think those sorts of hubs, if we, and certainly from a government point of view, we're supporting a number in things like life sciences and manufacturing. If we can create those sort of centres where people come together and share ideas, I think out of that you get some really positive outcomes.
That really resonates with me, because I think the community is still underdeveloped in this space, and there isn't as much sharing as there could be. Yeah.
I think we're in a really exciting phase. I think it's a great time to be here and to be alive. And when you look at the history of human innovation, the Industrial Revolution took ages. The computing revolution took about 10 years, and we're still on that journey. But some of the speed with which things are developing now is just so fascinating. And it generates that sense of excitement and passion in people. And out of that, we get some great outcomes, as I said.
Well, I've heard a few times we're in the exponential age where things grow so quickly. It's so hard to keep up.
Well, but there's also that debate about where the point of singularity is when artificial intelligence takes over, and we just all sit back and relax.
We end up like Wall-E, though. It'll be obese in floating chairs being served slushies.
Well, I think we can be realistic as well with that thinking.
So this is an interesting question. Would you be able to describe a project that you were involved in that crashed and burned, and can highlight the causes, and with hindsight, what could be done differently? Really open-ended one. I realise that. They're always
They
interesting.
used to ask this question in job interviews.
It's one of those outside the box questions that I find interesting, and people have a fun answer for.
When I first joined the Development Commission, there was a big project in Bunbury about managing erosion on the back beach of Bunbury, which is a long 1.6 kilometre stretch of beachland. And it would erode in every time you had a winter storm, and it would threaten all the road infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
So after a long period of head scratching and analysis, the engineers opted for the construction of some breakwaters to manage the erosion. That was great, apart from didn't really talk to a lot of local people who thought the idea of breakwaters going out and spoiling this long vista of the beach was absolutely appalling. So as a development commission, we were charged with the responsibility of building these things. And 6 months into the job, I thought, beam me up, Scotty. Because what it was the community really hadn't been engaged, and we hadn't taken them along on the journey of the science and the engineering. Now, in the end, the coastal erosion was managed by burying a large revetment wall back in the sand dune and rebuilding the sand dune in front of it and revegetating it. But the original project concept completely crashed and burned, and I've seen some headlines I would never like to repeat. But it's because we didn't get the engagement right. And these days, the social license is really important in terms of how we go about doing things, whether it's in IT, innovation or whatever. We can't afford to do things in a way that leaves a community behind.
The common thread I'm picking up is that communication is the most important thing.
Yeah, but effective communication so that you really are listening, and the communication is really clear about what you can do and what is possible and what is not possible. I mean, there are some things that the broader community would really aspire to, but technically we may not be in a position to achieve that. So we have to be clear about those reasons and get people participating in thinking about what the alternatives might be.
And realistic outcomes.
Yeah, so it's a process of iteration in a sense. You know, you arrive at an outcome through a series of steps and take people on the journey of testing out what the alternatives are.
On the future of innovation, you mentioned education a couple of times. Do you think we're doing enough today in terms of STEM education for tomorrow, people of tomorrow, the children of today?
Look, I think we are making some very good inroads on STEM education. I've been to, I actually think, you know, I go to a lot of school graduations, and I think the future's in great hands. You know, you see the year 12s graduating and the speeches they give and the way that they carry themselves, just amazing. And I think a great credit to their teachers. But when I've gone into the classrooms and looked at the STEM projects or the science labs in a primary school setting, kids have got such great curiosity and great passion to explore things, and they were doing some amazing things. You know, the kids in my electorate's high schools building remote controlled submarines and little racing cars and all sorts of stuff, but they were applying maths and engineering to the design and then building it, and then if the wheels fell off, they'd realise they hadn't got the maths right. But you're teaching that. But I think it's always important that at the back of this is that notion of creativity.
Yes.
Because all of this is coming out of what we think and what we imagine and connecting things together and coming up with something new. So I think we've always got to keep a good focus on the ability to think critically and to be creative, and there's a broader set of skills involved in that. But I think we're doing some great things now with science and engineering and maths.
Is the government focused on bringing more attention to the venture capital and things like that in this space?
Well, yeah, absolutely. That's part of telling the story about innovation in Western Australia. There's a lot of capital on the eastern states. That, you know, Western Australia is the other side of the country. It's like a different country.
Yeah.
We've got to get them excited about the capability that we have, and we do that by telling the story effectively.
Brilliant. All right. Is there anything you'd like us to ask you?
You were going to ask me about the song.
That is the last
you remember
one.
that?
Yes.
That's the final question.
Yeah.
Well, the final question on the song. This has occupied my office all day today.
Oh, man.
So usually it's the only gotcha question.
It's a surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know how familiar you are with boxing or UFC, but the fighters have their intro song, right? You know, the song that turns on, that informs the audience who that fighter's character is. What is your intro song?
Right. It's going to be The Times They Are A-Changing.
So nice. Very nice.
Very retro, but very forward-looking.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Great
Yeah,
to
that
be with
was,
you
that
both.
was really good.
Thanks.